I used to believe marriage was like cement. If you mixed it right and gave it time to set, nothing could crack it. That was my religion, my excuse, my stubborn little prayer. Every time life got hard. I was 28, and I'd been married to Ethan for 7 years. 7 years of ramen nights, air mattresses, double shifts, and the kind of we're in this together vows you don't just say, you survive. And for a long time, I truly thought we were bulletproof. That's the thing about slow heartbreak. It doesn't announce itself with a slammed door or lipstick on a collar. It shows up quietly, like a draft you swear you'll fix later, until winter moves in and your whole house starts to feel cold. It started with Ethan's eyes drifting away while I spoke, as if my words were background noise he could tune out. Then the sighs, those small, tired sighs he didn't bother to hide when I asked about his day. The little kindnesses I used to do, packing his lunch, fixing the dripping kitchen faucet, carrying groceries in while he scrolled, started landing like pebbles thrown into a void. I kept telling myself he was stressed, that marriages have rough patches, that this cold spell would pass. But winter stretched on, and one day, even his smallest touch disappeared. He used to brush my shoulder when he passed me in the hallway. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything. Then it stopped, like someone switched off a light without warning. During movie nights, when I reached for his hand, he flinched like I'd interrupted something sacred. We started sleeping on opposite sides of our king-size bed with an invisible wall of resentment between us. And then his sister Veronica moved in after her messy divorce. That was when my home stopped feeling like mine. 3 months later, at his family barbecue, Veronica looked at me with wine on her breath and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So, hypothetically, if Ethan ever cheated on you, would you cry?" People laughed. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to shut it down, and I saw it, a smirk. And then he said the sentence that finally killed the last piece of me that was still trying to hold on. I stood up, set my drink down, and whispered 2 words that somehow silenced the whole yard. Message received, and I walked away. Before everything fractured, before silence replaced laughter, I was the kind of woman who believed commitment was a skill you practiced, not a feeling you chased. I met Ethan when I was 21. I was working nights at a logistics office while finishing my degree, exhausted but hopeful, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, life would eventually soften. He was older, calmer, already settled into his warehouse management job, with that quiet steadiness people mistake for emotional maturity. He listened when I talked, really listened, or at least I thought he did. We didn't fall in love dramatically. There was no lightning bolt, no cinematic confession. It was slow, comfortable. The kind of love that grows when 2 people choose each other again and again in small, ordinary ways. We talked about everything back then, our fears, our plans, how neither of us came from money, how we wanted something better than what we'd grown up with. When we moved in together, we slept on an air mattress for almost a year because we couldn't afford a real bed. We laughed about it, told ourselves it was temporary. When money got tight, we ate ramen for weeks straight, seasoning it differently, like that somehow made it gourmet. We fought sometimes, long arguments that stretched until dawn, but we always circled back to the same conclusion. We were a team. The night he forgot our anniversary still stands out in my memory. He was pulling double shifts, barely sleeping, running on caffeine and obligation. I waited up, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending I understood. When he finally stumbled in at 2 a.m, eyes full of guilt, I wrapped my arms around him and whispered, "We're a team. Always remember that." Those words became the spine of our marriage. Ethan loved calling me his rock, said I kept him grounded when his head was in the clouds. I wore that label like armor. I thought being steady meant being irreplaceable. I didn't understand that sometimes the rock is just something people lean on without ever looking at. Over the years, I became the quiet constant in our life, the one who handled the boring stuff. Bills, paperwork, scheduling, fixing what broke before it became a problem. I didn't mind. I told myself love didn't need applause. His family tolerated me. They were loud, opinionated, sharp-tongued, in that way they called honest. I was different, quieter, observant, polite. I never quite fit into their rhythm, but as long as Ethan and I were solid, it didn't matter. Or so I thought. Veronica, his sister, was always a force of chaos. Dramatic, impulsive, allergic to responsibility. She thrived on attention and had a talent for turning every room into a stage. But she lived her own life, and I lived mine. We coexisted. For years, things were stable, not thrilling, not terrible, just steady. Until they weren't. Looking back, I see the signs I ignored. The way Ethan stopped asking for my opinion. How decisions became announcements. How my presence shifted from partner to furniture, useful, familiar, easily overlooked. At the time, I didn't call it neglect. I called it marriage. And I stayed, believing endurance was the same thing as love. The shift didn't come with a warning. There was no single moment I could point to and say that's when everything changed. It was more like living in a house where the air slowly thins until one day you realize you've been holding your breath for years. Ethan started treating conversations like chores. I'd talk, and his eyes would drift, not to the TV, not even to his phone, just somewhere past me. Like my voice had become ambient noise. When I asked about his day, he answered with one-word summaries. Fine. Busy. Same. If I pressed, he sighed, heavy and theatrical, like my curiosity was an unreasonable demand. Those sighs hurt more than yelling ever could. I kept trying to reconnect in small ways. I suggested dinner dates, weekend getaways, even short walks around the neighborhood just to talk. He always had an excuse ready. Too tired. Too many errands. Maybe next weekend. Next weekend never came. The jokes we used to share, those stupid little phrases only we understood, disappeared completely. The knowing looks across crowded rooms vanished. He smiled more at his phone than at me, and when I asked who he was texting, he'd answer too quickly, too casually. Just work. The worst part wasn't the arguments. It was when we stopped arguing altogether. People think yelling means a relationship is falling apart, but silence is the real butcher. Silence means you've stopped believing the other person is worth the effort. We became ghosts haunting a house we'd built together. Then the smirks started. At first, they were subtle. Quick eye rolls when I said something he found stupid. That tight purse of his lips when I made a comment he didn't like. He'd glance away like I was an annoying relative he had to tolerate at family gatherings. It stung worse than any direct insult. What he didn't say hung in the air like smoke, making it clear my presence had become a burden he hadn't figured out how to shed yet. One night, after another evening of walking on eggshells, I finally asked the question I'd been dreading. I kept my voice calm, neutral, almost rehearsed. Ethan, are you happy with us? He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with tired eyes and said, why do you ask questions when you already know the answers? That sentence hit me like a physical blow. I nodded, walked out to the garage, and stood there staring at the wall for over an hour, not knowing how to go back inside without falling apart. There were hundreds of moments like that, tiny, seemingly insignificant to anyone watching from the outside. But to me, they were paper cuts that slowly bled me dry. I started shrinking. My shoulders hunched. My voice got quieter. I laughed less. I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving. I became the woman who showed up, paid the mortgage, took out the trash on Tuesday mornings. Not a partner, not a lover, just a placeholder keeping the household running. Leaving felt impossible. Leaving felt like admitting failure, like breaking the promises I'd made 7 years earlier. For better or worse, right? No one tells you what you're supposed to do when the worst isn't betrayal or abuse. Just slow-burning apathy and contempt. And then Veronica moved in. Officially, it was temporary. After her divorce, she had nowhere else to go. No money for a deposit, no furniture, no timeline for leaving. Ethan didn't even ask how I felt about it. He told me, like a fact, like a weather report. And just like that, the last fragile sense of balance in our home tipped. That was the moment I stopped being invisible. I became replaceable. Veronica didn't just move into our house. She invaded it. From the first night, her presence filled every corner of our space, loud and unapologetic. Boxes piled up in the hallway. Her clothes spilled out of suitcases like she planned to stay forever. She laughed too loudly, talked too much, and somehow made every conversation orbit around her pain, her divorce, her trauma. And Ethan lit up around her. It was subtle at first, the way his voice got animated when she spoke, how he leaned in, fully engaged, while I sat right there, nodding along like a background extra. I watched his face soften in ways I hadn't seen in months. In the mornings, I poured coffee for both of us out of habit. Somehow, Veronica's cup always got filled first, topped with whipped cream and cinnamon sprinkles if we had them. Mine arrived lukewarm, if at all. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a message. I'd slipped another rung down the priority ladder. She took over my home office for her creative projects and yoga sessions without asking. Her laundry covered the bathroom floor. Her music blasted through the walls until midnight. Friends showed up unannounced for impromptu wine tastings in our living room, laughing and clinking glasses while I retreated to the bedroom with a book I couldn't focus on. I started tiptoeing through my own house, apologizing for taking up space that used to be mine. The afternoon everything shifted for me. I decided to surprise Ethan. I ordered takeout from his favorite Thai place, the one we used to save for special occasions when money was tight. I'd been planning it all day, imagining his face lighting up, maybe a genuine smile, maybe a moment that reminded us of who we used to be. When I walked in, the smell of sugar hit me first. Veronica and Ethan were in the kitchen, frosting cupcakes together, flower clips in their hair, laughing over some romantic comedy I'd never heard of. They paused when I entered, acknowledged me with polite nods, then went right back to their bonding like I'd never walked in at all. No, you didn't have to do that. No, thanks for dinner. No smile. I ate my pad thai alone at the kitchen counter, listening to their laughter float past me like I wasn't even there. That night I couldn't sleep. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the photos, searching for some trace of the home Ethan and I had created together. But the house reflected what had already happened. I'd become an extra in my own life, watching my marriage dissolve in real time. 3 months later came the barbecue. Ethan's family had never been my biggest fans, but they tolerated me when we were solid. That day, I felt their indifference like a physical weight. I grabbed a drink from the cooler and hovered near the grill, trying to blend into the background. Isolation followed me anyway. Veronica, already drunk by early afternoon, spotted me and called out loudly, "Hey, don't look so nervous. I promise nobody's going to bite you." Laughter rippled through the group. I forced a smile, moved closer, tried to deflect with small talk. She patted the bench beside her. "Sit down. Let's have a real conversation." The way she said real made my stomach tighten. She leaned in, wine on her breath, and stage whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "So, hypothetically, if Ethan ever cheated on you, would you cry?" The laughter exploded. Someone yelled, "She probably already has." Another voice chimed in, "What about that trainer at his gym?" I looked at Ethan. He was sitting back in a lawn chair, glass of wine in hand. And for just a moment, I saw it. A smirk. Not embarrassment, not anger at his sister's cruelty. Amusement. Then he spoke, his voice clear and sharp enough to slice straight through me. "Well, it's not like she's exactly setting any records in bed anyway." The laughter reached a roar. Something cold slid through my chest, replacing the heat of humiliation with something final. I stood slowly, set my drink down, and looked around at the people I'd called family for 7 years. They were having the time of their lives at my expense. "Message received," I said quietly, and I walked away. I didn't run. That surprised me later when I replayed the moment in my head. I didn't slam anything, didn't shout, didn't cry in front of them. I walked, slow, steady, deliberate, like my body finally understood something my heart had been refusing to accept for months. Behind me, I could feel the shift. The laughter died too quickly, like someone had yanked the power cord. I didn't turn around to look. I already knew what I'd see. Awkward faces, half-formed regret, people suddenly aware they'd gone too far, but not brave enough to admit it. As I passed through the side gate, Ethan's mother called out, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Sweetheart, where are you going?" I paused, my hand on the latch, and turned back just enough to meet her eyes. "Thank you for the hospitality," I said calmly. "Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon." Then I stepped through and kept walking. Each step away from that backyard felt like peeling off a layer of skin that had been dead for a long time. My legs shook, but my mind was strangely clear. No screaming thoughts, no racing heart, just a quiet, brutal certainty settling into place. I walked 6 blocks to my car. 6 blocks where every memory replayed itself without mercy. Ethan forgetting our anniversary. His sighs, the way he flinched when I touched him. Veronica's laugh echoing in my kitchen. The cupcakes, the coffee cups, the smirks. By the time I reached the driver's seat, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't wondering if I was too sensitive, or if I'd misread things, or if this was just a phase. They had shown me exactly where I stood, not as a wife, not even as a person. As entertainment. I drove home alone. The radio stayed off. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same walls, same porch light, but I felt like I was entering a place I no longer belonged. That night, I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry until my eyes swelled shut like I'd imagined I would someday if things truly fell apart. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, listening to the silence he'd trained me to accept. I asked myself the question I'd avoided for years. When did I start believing this was all I deserved? I thought about the altar, the vows, the promise to endure, and for the first time I understood something no one had ever explained to me. Endurance without dignity isn't loyalty, it's self-erasure. I slept for maybe an hour. At 4:30 a.m., I woke up with a clarity so sharp it almost felt peaceful. No anger, no panic, just purpose. I moved through the house quietly, like a guest, checking out early. I packed 2 duffel bags with only what mattered: clothes, my laptop, documents, the emergency cash I'd been saving without telling Ethan. I didn't touch anything sentimental. No photos, no keepsakes. Those belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. On the kitchen counter, I left a simple note. Hope the joke was worth it. Underneath, I placed the divorce papers I'd had prepared weeks earlier, back when I finally admitted to myself that my marriage was already dead, even if no one had said it out loud yet. At 5:15 a.m., I backed out of the driveway for the last time. As the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel heartbroken either. I felt empty and strangely free. I drove east towards the mountains, following routes I'd memorized during sleepless nights, toward a cabin I'd rented online under a fake name, prepaid, no questions asked, owned by an old man named Frank who promised privacy and meant it. As the city faded and the road narrowed, my shoulders finally dropped. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling judged. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't running away. I was choosing myself. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that didn't even show up properly on most maps. 40 acres of pine trees, damp earth, and silence so complete it felt almost loud. No neighbors, no cell towers, no Wi-Fi. Just wind moving through branches and the soft creak of wood settling into itself. Frank had been exactly as advertised, old, quiet, uninterested in my story. He handed me the keys, showed me how to work the generator, and left me alone. That first night, I slept on the couch wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I woke up sore, hungry, and disoriented, but something inside my chest felt lighter. I set up my laptop on a wooden table by the window and started taking freelance programming work. My clients didn't care where I lived as long as code was delivered on time. Deadlines replaced emotional landmines. Logic replaced chaos. For the first time in years, effort actually led to results. Days fell into a rhythm. Work until noon. Simple lunches, long walks through the woods. I learned how to chop firewood properly, how to identify bird calls, how silence could be soothing instead of threatening. Evenings were quiet. Lamplight, basic meals, the sound of owls instead of laughter at my expense. For 3 months, I stayed completely off the grid. No social media, no phone calls, no contact with my old life. I grew stronger, leaner. Calluses formed on my hands from splitting logs. I stopped shrinking. I stood straighter. I laughed out loud sometimes, surprised by the sound of my own voice echoing off the trees. Most importantly, I remembered who I was before I became someone's emotional furniture. Back home, though, things were unraveling. I didn't know it yet, but my absence hit like a structural failure no one had planned for. Curiosity eventually crept in. One rainy afternoon, I drove into the nearest town and checked my old email at the public library. 67 unread messages. Most of them were from Ethan. The earliest ones were furious. Running away like a coward won't solve anything. You can't just disappear when things get difficult. This is so typical of you. I felt nothing reading them. No anger. No urge to respond. As the weeks passed, the tone shifted. Please just tell me you're safe. I found the papers. We need to talk about this. Then came the reframing. Veronica feels terrible about what happened. It was just a joke that went too far. You're being way too sensitive. I almost laughed at that one. The message that landed hardest came near the end. I've been thinking about us, about what we used to have. Maybe we can fix this. Too little, too late. 7 years of quiet effort erased by a sentence he'd laughed through. Through mutual friends, people who checked in gently, without pressure, I started learning what had happened after I left. Veronica had been forced to move out when Ethan realized he couldn't afford the mortgage alone. Turns out I'd been handling more of the finances than anyone had acknowledged. Budgeting, payments, planning, things that only become visible when they're gone. Ethan's father's small construction business hit trouble soon after. I'd been managing their books for 3 years, organizing expenses, tracking invoices, preparing tax documents. When I vanished, the system collapsed. Penalties piled up. Deadlines were missed. Contractors complained. His mother's online boutique folded completely. Inventory chaos, missed orders, refunds she couldn't process. All the invisible work I'd done, quiet, unpaid, unrecognized, had been holding everything together. And now it was gone. Ethan's messages grew frantic. "Where did you put the tax files? I can't find the insurance documents. Please just call me. We need your help." I never replied. Veronica, I heard, had become radioactive in their social circle. People didn't enjoy being associated with someone who turned humiliation into entertainment. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped coming. Meanwhile, Ethan sold his car to make mortgage payments. Then the house. Then downsized into a studio apartment. Friends chose sides. His certainty dissolved into panic. I watched all of it from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. I hadn't destroyed their lives. I'd simply stopped holding them up. And the strangest part? I didn't feel guilty, because for the first time, the chaos wasn't mine to manage. It was theirs, and I was finally free to keep walking forward, deeper into a life that felt like my own. Freedom doesn't arrive fully formed. No one warns you that even when you escape something toxic, the weight of it still follows you into quiet places, especially at night, especially when there's no noise left to drown out your thoughts. The cabin was peaceful, but peace has a way of making old wounds louder. Some nights I woke up convinced I'd imagined everything, that I'd overreacted, that maybe Ethan's comment at the barbecue really was just a joke that went too far, that maybe I should have stayed and talked it out like an adult instead of disappearing like a coward, just like he'd accused me of. Those were the nights I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the dark. I replayed memories on a loop. The early years, the air mattress, the ramen, the way he used to look at me like I mattered. I wondered when exactly that look had changed, if I'd done something wrong, if I'd slowly trained him to disrespect me by forgiving too much, by explaining away behavior that should have been confronted. That thought hurt more than anything else, because it meant admitting I'd helped build the cage I'd been trapped in. I started questioning my own worth, not in dramatic ways, not sobbing or screaming. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. I wondered if I really was boring, predictable, if my steadiness was just another word for forgettable, if I'd mistaken being useful for being loved. Some mornings I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed right away. The silence that had once felt healing started to feel heavy, pressing down on my chest. I worked mechanically, ate mechanically, moved through the day like someone underwater. There was no one to reassure me, no one to remind me who I was. That's when I hit the lowest point. One evening, I found myself standing on the porch, staring out at the trees, thinking about how easy it would be to disappear even further, change my name, cut all ties, become someone no one had expectations of. I hadn't just lost a marriage. I'd lost my sense of identity. I went back inside, sat at the table, and opened my laptop, not to work, but to read old files, emails, notes, spreadsheets, quiet proof of how much I'd done behind the scenes, how many problems I'd solved without applause, how often I'd stepped in to help, smooth things over, make life easier for people who never noticed. For the first time, I let myself see the truth without minimizing it. I hadn't been invisible because I was insignificant. I'd been invisible because I was reliable. And people who benefit from your reliability rarely want you to stop. That realization broke something open in me. I cried that night. Not the choking kind, not the kind that leaves you gasping. It was slow, steady, cleansing. Grief for the woman who thought love meant endurance at any cost. Grief for the years I'd spent making myself smaller so others could feel larger. I slept deeply for the first time since I left. In the morning, the forest looked different. Not brighter, not magically healed, but honest. I made myself coffee, sat on the porch, and let the cold air fill my lungs. I didn't promise myself happiness. I didn't vow to be stronger. I made a simpler decision. I would never again beg someone to treat me with basic dignity. That was the moment I stopped wanting explanations and started wanting peace. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. There was no dramatic phone call, no sudden revelation shouted into the void, It arrived quietly, the way truth often does, when you finally stop running from it and let it sit beside you. I drove into town one afternoon for supplies and ended up at the public library again. Same wooden tables, same smell of old books and dust. I logged into my email, not because I expected anything new, but because I felt ready. Among the unread messages was one I hadn't seen before. It wasn't from Ethan. It was from his cousin, Michael. We were never close. Friendly at family gatherings, polite conversations about work, nothing more, which is why his message stopped me cold. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it. What happened at the barbecue was wrong. I laughed, and I shouldn't have. I keep replaying it, and it makes me sick. You didn't deserve that. Not from Veronica, not from Ethan, not from any of us. I read it twice, then a third time. Something in my chest loosened. It wasn't validation I'd been waiting for. I'd already found that on my own. It was confirmation. Proof that I hadn't imagined the cruelty. That it hadn't been just a joke. That silence afterward hadn't meant approval. It had meant cowardice. Michael went on. I always thought you were a good wife. You showed up. You helped everyone. We took that for granted. I'm sorry. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, hands resting on the table, breathing evenly. That was the moment I realized something important. I didn't need Ethan to understand. I didn't need his apology to move forward. I didn't need his family's approval to validate my pain. I had already outgrown the version of myself who waited for permission to leave. On the drive back to the cabin, I didn't feel angry. I felt powerful, not in an aggressive way, not in a triumphant way, in a grounded way. I understood my value now, not because someone finally acknowledged it, but because I'd stopped denying it. That night, I went through my things and organized what I'd brought with me. Documents, files, work samples. I saw my life clearly for the first time. My skills, my resilience, my quiet competence. I wasn't just a wife who'd been discarded. I was a whole person. When Ethan finally showed up weeks later, soaked from the rain, standing on my porch with divorce papers in hand, I didn't feel fear or longing. I felt calm. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. His eyes held something I hadn't seen in years. Remorse. I'm not here to ask you to come back, he said, voice barely steady. I'm here because you deserve better, and I needed to say that to your face. I let him in, made coffee, listened. He admitted everything. The influence, the contempt, the way he'd mistaken reliability for weakness. The barbecue, the moment he realized who he'd become when he watched me walk away and felt nothing but shock. I lost the best thing in my life because I thought ordinary love wasn't enough, he said, tears sliding down his face. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I told him the truth. Sorry matters, I said gently, but it doesn't rebuild what you dismantled piece by piece. You didn't just hurt me that day. You showed me who I was to you. He nodded. He understood. And when he left, I stood on the porch watching the rain fade, feeling something settle into place. Closure. Not because he apologized, but because I no longer needed him to. After Ethan left the cabin, I didn't feel relief the way people describe it in movies. I felt stillness, the kind that settles after a storm has passed and taken everything unstable with it. No more waiting for the next wave, no more bracing myself for impact, just quiet, honest air. Back home, though, the consequences were anything but quiet. I didn't have to ask. News has a way of traveling when a carefully balanced system collapses. Mutual friends reached out, not to pull me back in, but to tell me what had happened once the dust settled. Without me, everything started slipping. Ethan had underestimated how much of our shared life I'd been quietly holding together. Not because I wanted control, but because I was used to being the one who made sure things didn't fall apart. Bills paid on time, documents organized, long-term planning handled without fuss. When I left, that invisible scaffolding vanished. He couldn't keep up with the mortgage alone. The house went first, then the car, then the version of himself that believed I was replaceable. His parents felt it next. For years, I'd been helping his father manage the finances of his small construction business. Not officially, not for pay, just family helping family. I tracked expenses, organized timelines, prepared tax documents, caught mistakes before they turned into penalties. Without me, deadlines were missed. An expensive accountant had to be hired, one who uncovered years of disorganized records and lost deductions that cost thousands. Contracts fell through when detailed project estimates couldn't be produced on time. The business limped instead of growing. His mother's online boutique didn't survive at all. She couldn't manage inventory. Orders went unfulfilled. Refunds stacked up. Customers disappeared. What had once been a point of pride quietly shut down within months. And Veronica? Veronica burned through goodwill faster than anyone expected. After being forced out of Ethan's place, she bounced between friends' couches, carrying her chaos with her. The same people who once laughed along with her jokes grew tired of being surrounded by drama. Invitations dried up. Calls went unanswered. Eventually, she moved back in with her aging parents, 42 years old, sleeping in her childhood bedroom. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the deepest fallout wasn't financial. It was relational. That barbecue cracked something open in the family dynamic. Once I was gone, people started talking, really talking, about what had happened, about how easily they'd joined in, about how cruel it had been. Arguments broke out at gatherings. Some defended it as just humor. Others admitted it crossed a line. Ethan found himself in an impossible position, unable to fully defend his family without condemning himself, and unable to fully condemn them without admitting he'd been complicit. Guilt has a way of isolating you. He started therapy, lost weight, developed insomnia. His therapist, according to someone who stayed in touch, told him something that finally stuck. Watching someone you claim to love be humiliated without intervening is a form of psychological cruelty. That truth followed him everywhere. Meanwhile, I didn't celebrate any of this. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. I hadn't left to punish anyone. I hadn't disappeared to make a point. I left because staying was destroying me. Everything that followed was simply the natural consequence of people losing the person who'd been quietly compensating for their dysfunction. I didn't take revenge. I took my absence, and that turned out to be enough. From my porch, watching the trees sway in the wind, I understood something I'd never fully grasped before. When you stop absorbing the damage meant for others, it doesn't disappear. It lands exactly where it belongs. And for the first time in years, it wasn't landing on me. A year has passed since I walked out of that barbecue and kept walking. I'm still here in the mountains, still waking up to pine-scented air and silence that feels earned instead of imposed. I bought the cabin from Frank when he retired to Arizona. It's mine now. Every creak of the floorboards, every imperfect corner. A place where no one laughs at my expense, where my worth isn't measured by how useful I am to someone else. I didn't come here to reinvent myself. I came here to remember who I already was. I kept working remotely, building a life that didn't require me to perform or compete for attention. Somewhere along the way, I met Lucas, a park ranger who thinks my quiet strength is attractive instead of boring. We hike together, cook simple meals, talk without interruption, no cruelty disguised as humor, no silence used as punishment. Peace is addictive when you've lived without it. Sometimes I think back to that day, the smirk, the laughter, the sentence that finally broke the illusion I'd been clinging to. And as strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. Because cruelty, when it's exposed that clearly, becomes a gift. It strips away denial. It kills false hope. It forces you to choose yourself. I learned something I wish I'd understood earlier. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Being tolerated is not the same as being respected. And endurance, when it costs you your dignity, is not a virtue. It's a warning sign. I confused usefulness with value. I thought if I held everything together quietly enough, I'd earn security. Instead, I made myself invisible to people who benefited from my silence. Leaving didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. When people ask about my divorce, I keep it simple. We grew apart, wanted different things. No need to relive the details. I don't need revenge stories or public vindication. The best closure I found wasn't in apologies or consequences. It was in building a life where I no longer had to shrink. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, the walking on eggshells, the jokes that cut a little too deep, the way you keep excusing behavior that hurts you, please hear this. Love doesn't require you to disappear. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying and enduring. It's standing up, stepping through the gate, and trusting that somewhere ahead, there's a place where you finally belong.